Hey everybody, this is Pastor Roger Cook, pastor of Red Door Ministries. Red Door Ministries is a fully affirming and welcoming faith-based club at Radford University that is sponsored by the Grace Episcopal Church Radford. I'm also pastor of Your Church MCC, an emerging metropolitan community church in New River Valley that's also fully affirming and welcoming. So glad to have you as we continue our barrier breaking series. Today's going to be an amazing day as we have our discussion with Atlas. Atlas is an entrepreneur, Appalachian activist, and adventurer. They have been all around the world, recently in China, but most of their work is centered in Appalachia. So this is going to be very exciting. So glad you can join us. Hey, Atlas. Hey, Atlas, how you doing?
Hey there.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thank you for joining us, Atlas. I really appreciate this.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
I am so excited about this. Sunday, I was really hoping to maybe have more students. Might not have any students because of Sunday, because during the week they usually say, well, I can't meet this day or that day. But what I'm finding through Zoom fatigue with the students is sometimes I don't have a lot of participation. I've been having anywhere 4 to 5 to 9 students, when last year when we was meeting physically, we'd run up close to 20. But with COVID and everything being Zoom, a lot of them won't show up live, but then they'll show up afterwards and watch it on YouTube and share it. So that may happen here also. That's one reason why I got the questions ahead of time. But I thank you for your time. Real excited about this. But first, just want to check in and see, how are you doing through COVID, and you and your spouse and everything doing?
So COVID has been really hard for us. We were in another country when COVID started, and not even the country where we were living in at the time. So we were in Thailand visiting.
Oh, okay. Because I had told the students, was I allowed to tell students where you were at? Because I did. I don't know if I was supposed to or not, or because.
No, it's okay. So I was in Thailand actually backpacking.
How did that happen?
Well, we were there for our honeymoon, and so Kaylee and I went for 3.5 weeks to Thailand because traveling Asia is really cheap, and we backpacked. So we had 2 backpacks with us, and that's it. And most of what that was clothes. But before we could get back from Thailand, we weren't sure if we went back to China, if they would let us out, if they would let us back into the U.S., or what would really happen. So we flew straight from Thailand back to America and left.
Did you leave your stuff behind?
We left everything we owned in China, and it's still there.
Oh, wow.
So we have some stuff here. We bought clothes. That's the biggest thing. But we've moved 4 times since we've been back, and finally just been in a stable place for the last couple months. We were both unemployed for 8 months. We've had a hard. I had COVID personally. Like I had COVID back in April. So it's been
What was
really.
That like?
It felt like someone was putting logging chains around my chest and pulling on them all the time. It was really painful. I think I had a less severe case than some people do. I didn't have a whole lot of respiratory issues, but did have the chest pains and shortness of breath and those sort of things. And so, it's just been a lot for us. And I now have a new job, which is good. Kaylee's still like working temp jobs, and so it's just been maybe a really chaotic few months for us.
That's unreal. I know right when COVID happened, we were having a baby that was, almost a couple months premature. I should know exactly, Atlas, how premature. My wife's gonna kill me. I can't right now remember how premature, but I know like 7-8 weeks premature, and it was like right when that happened was when the world shut down.
Yeah.
And I remember your mom on social media just kind of just letting the world kind of know a little bit what was going on, but I had no idea. I thought you were still in China. I had no idea you were in Thailand. What about like your laptop, computers, stuff like that there? Would you have that with
All
you?
there.
Or?
No, it's all still in China. So I was actually writing a book with a friend, and everything was saved on that computer, and so my book is still in China too.
Are you paying rent on your place there, or how's your
No,
stuff?
they packed my stuff up. We paid rent for 3 months, and then they packed my stuff up, and they're storing it in my agent's office.
Wow. And
Yeah.
there's no way you guys can continue. I know you were teaching English, I think. You can't teach virtually. Are you doing any of that? Or
Not through the company that I was working with. They did shortly, but the university that I was working for did not do online teaching.
oh wow. And you're in Appalachia, which is what I shared with people,
Yep.
and just my experience with Appalachia. Also, I mean, are you experiencing that they don't believe in COVID, or do they believe in COVID? And here you
Well,
are, have had it. Or?
I think that also depends on who the leader of the municipality or the state is. Like, I live in Tennessee right now, and I would say generally Tennesseans are very cavalier about COVID. They're very unbelieving in some instances. The governor has been rather atrocious in dealing with it. He chose to spend a few $1 million on a mask campaign versus making masks mandatory. He made decisions to be one of the last states to shut down during quarantine and one of the first to reopen. We're playing high school sports when a lot of other states aren't, and we had made that decision before a lot of other states did. So it is rather difficult in Tennessee, but I traveled last weekend to see a friend in Auburn, and Alabama was completely different. Places weren't open for dining, eating. A lot of fast food restaurants only had drive-throughs. There was a lot more precautions in place that I saw people following. Auburn University had a mask mandate for anybody on campus, outside or in. So I think it definitely depends on where you're at in Appalachia, because let's take Radford for example. It's a city, so probably more people believe than not. Also, you have a denser population, and so there's just necessity for wearing masks and believing COVID exists. But in another part of Virginia, a rural part, I don't think that's happening. So I think it just depends on kind of a lot of situational variables around you.
Well, I know you're familiar with Bluefield, also having went to college there. If you haven't heard, COVID's just now getting there, and they've been largely unbelieving. Now, people who see this may disagree, but what I've seen, going back to visit my wife's grandmother, who's 84 years old and really wasn't believing in it. She hadn't seen the baby, so we both took a round of quarantining and getting tested, and she agreed to do it so she could see the baby. And I'm sure you know, we got a 6-month-old, we got a 2-year-old, and we got my 14-year-old son. And all my older children, but she really didn't believe it until one of her 80-something-year-old friends contracted COVID recently. And then now all of the Graham schools in Bluefield are shut down because some people there have COVID. So it's just now becoming real to that area. Here in Radford, I mean, we were number 4 in the nation for a while of COVID. And so our restaurants have been closed for months. The campus is mask only. We had a beautiful Black Lives Matter movement last week that so many people was against, but it was done very well, very socially distanced. WGBJ7 posted an awesome picture from a drone, how spaced everyone was in the masks it was. But yeah, taking it more serious. Taking it serious. There's some lax areas, but I'm glad people are taking it serious as they are. We're taking it very serious in that my 14-year-old son is type 1 diabetic and is at risk immune system wise. So we don't go out. We just don't go out. I mean, I go out, I work nights, which has been great talking to you and us trying to coordinate our schedules with your jobs and my job. I work nights. My wife works during the day. I take care of the boys. Other than work, we don't go out. We go out for like after we have our conversation today, we're gonna go out for a walk down to Redbox, turn our movies back in, but we'll wear masks to just get outside and get some exercise. But we don't go to restaurants. We don't go anywhere. Just trying to stay safe.
Yeah, so my current job requires interaction with at-risk populations. Like homeless folks will stop by the center sometimes, and so it's been difficult for me to navigate, like, how do I be safe while also like doing a job that's necessary during this time. And so yeah, that's been a big process since I've been hired at this new job, but I think I've done an okay job with that. But I think it's difficult because we're seeing numbers like double in the area where I'm at weekly. They double, and until there's an order from up top, it's going to be difficult to shut down businesses or keep people out of businesses or out of public. And I just don't know that's going to happen. We just topped 200,000 deaths and about 7 million cases. And, that's just, it's unbelievable to me because the rest of the world has figured it out. They've figured out how to stop it in their countries, or at least slow it down, and ours doesn't have a whole lot of, it doesn't show a whole lot of that trend. It'll slow down for a while and then start to pick it back up again in a lot of places. So I'm not sure what to expect.
Well, and like with what you're doing vocationally, with part of our ministry, is we started off feeding homeless college students and college students with food security issues. Now with COVID, it's spread to families because so many people are out of work. Are you seeing, I know that job probably hadn't been at a long time, but are you seeing increases in joblessness also with COVID?
Yeah, so I have a lot of friends who have been impacted by that. I mean, my spouse and I I've been in this job, but my spouse is still like jumping temporary jobs here and there. And so I have a lot of friends that have also lost jobs, not been able to find jobs, especially they've not been able to replace their old jobs with jobs that pay the same amount or have the same benefits. And so that's been some of the issue. And statistically, we saw a large unemployment spike, and we're still not back down to normal rates from that. So, I mean, joblessness is definitely a big issue right now. And in lieu of any stimulus money, which the rest of the world also seems to have figured out, I think it's going to be really hard for people to continue meeting basic needs. I mean, I work with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline every day. I answer hotline calls, and suicide rates are skyrocketing. Suicidal ideation is going up because people can't meet their basic needs, and that's just unacceptable. So, joblessness is a part of that, but I think that we also have to look at, there's social problems now because we don't have interaction with people. I talk to a lot of people on the hotline that are just lonely, that don't have other people to interact with, that don't have family to check up on them. And so I think that's a hard part of that too, is that not only are your basic needs being endangered, but also your social life, the part of you that needs to talk to other humans and have interaction is also suffering too.
Yeah, that's something I've been almost every week reaching out with the students and just in general to the church we're also starting and people we interact with. And this has been a great opportunity to start a church during COVID. That's just been awesome. But we've been, everything's online, and the generation we're in, everything's, I don't, and you've seen and been part of ministries I've been part of before. And I'm really at a place in my life where I think that is not as effective as interacting with people on a personal level. So most of what I do now is mainly one-on-one or in very small groups. And but something I've been challenging everybody to do every week is just reach out to somebody. Reach out for that reason right there is so many people are not getting basic social interaction. And even in especially nursing homes. My wife works with social services. She's head of child protective services for one of our local counties. But she's even turned me on to some like monies that are, and it's sad that you got to pay people to do it, but there are monies available for people just to spend time with senior citizens that are not getting social interaction. And it's such, I've never seen a time like this. I've never expected a time like this. And Atlas, I could talk to you about so much stuff. The more you're talking, the more stuff's coming to my mind. I love, honestly, your attitudes toward politics. I'm wanting to find out the things you're into now. You've really whet my appetite asking questions on social media. I really like how you word stuff about looking for ideas for titles and looking for ideas for what would you call this outreach or this work. I think it's political. I don't know because you're kind of closed about it. I want to hear more about that. But one thing I know that our students have asked about is how in the world does someone from Appalachia end up in China? How did that happen?
Well, the simple answer is my wife, who also, she's also from Appalachia though. So Kaylee is my wife, and she went to Shenzhen, China, and taught English for a year before coming back. So after she graduated college, she went to China and then came home. We met when she was back in America, and so soon after she was offered another job in China. By that time, I was enamored and wanted to marry her and said, I don't want you to leave. And she said, okay, well, after you finish graduate school, can we go to China? And so I agreed. I've always wanted to travel. Asia has always been really interesting for me. Unfortunately, my experience in China was dampered by the culture shock that I lived in. I didn't really exit culture shock while in China because I would stay for a few months and then travel to another country and then, spend a couple weeks there. And then I would re-enter China and the culture shock just would come back. And so I would travel again to another country and then go back to China and it would just hit me again. And so I dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety because of not only the culture shock, but also I was working about 12 hours a week. And so I'm used to working 40 plus hours a week, plus having like 10 side projects, and I just wasn't, I wasn't working the way that I normally do. So there was some depression there. Like I stayed in bed, watched a lot of Arrow on, Hulu or Netflix or whatever it's on. And
at least it's a good show. I love Arrow.
Yeah, but there's a lot of seasons, so it kept me busy for quite some time. I found a Starbucks, which made me think that maybe I was at home for a little while. I could go, and it was this familiar environment. I went there quite a bit, but in all honesty, it was hard for me to get out of the house to feed myself. It was hard to get up and clean. It was hard for me to want to go out. And I had a good job. I had a good paying job, a job that I loved. I taught English as a second language to sophomores at a university, and my students were great. There was a lot of positives there, but we went to a city that just wasn't as international as what Kaylee had lived in before. And so it was really difficult because neither one of us knew Chinese very well. I can speak very little, enough to survive. And so that was difficult. I think a large portion of my stress too was nobody ever knew how to take my gender. So people would follow me in the bathroom screaming at me that I was going to the wrong bathroom, no matter really what I did. So eventually I learned how to quit back in Chinese, and Chinese doesn't really have sarcasm in the language. So my quips were a little weird. But eventually I learned how. And, I don't know if that was the right approach, but I was just so tired of being screamed at walking into a bathroom. I just wanted to pee and wanted people to leave me alone. And eventually I went to the men's bathroom all the time, never had any problems there, but women's bathrooms gave me a lot of issue. And so in a lot of ways, I look back and like I was in survival mode for most of that time. But beyond my negative experiences in China, China is a really great place. Like I would go on record to say really positive things that I think people would fight me about about China. I think in general, their citizens have a pretty good life, and China makes a lot of decisions that I don't agree with about censorship and leadership and how their government runs, but they do make a lot of good decisions too. So, I think I can't tell you what I would rather maybe live in at this moment in time, a failing democracy or a pseudo-communist state. I'm not really sure, because both of them's got, problems that I definitely don't agree with. So
And that's one of the things I really do appreciate you addressing, because you've never been quiet about your political leanings. And I've loved that. But I was wondering, like, yeah, how's Atlas going to do in China? So thank you for sharing that, because I was wondering, like, what was it like, politically to be there?
Really, politics, everyday life is pretty apolitical in the way that I think Americans would see it. So China's official messaging is that they're socialist. If you ask a Chinese person, some of them say socialist, some of them say communist, and none of them care. They don't care about the distinction. And I do think it's pseudo-communist, and I say that because there are a lot of socialist characteristics. And Xi, even in their last national convention, said that it was socialism with like Chinese characteristics. So it's starting to morph a bit beyond socialism. But truthfully, politics didn't really affect me there. Kaylee and I, probably because we had the privilege of passing, most people thought that I was male. So we had the privilege of passing, and so we didn't have a lot of problems. I don't know how two like cis women or two cis men would do in China. I can't speak to that, but I mean, other than the bathroom issue, I can't tell you that their politics really affected me, other than like I was told not to talk about religion or politics in class, which I didn't have a whole lot of problems with that and understood. But I don't know. I think I was fine. Censorship of media was hard for me to understand, because like they definitely get propaganda messages. Like I would say in general that Chinese humans felt somewhat naive to me, just because like they're not exposed to some hard truths that I think those in countries with free media are. But that may be a harsh assessment. And I'm not saying naive in a bad way. They just like there's more innocence because I think they're not exposed to the issues that we are. So I did pretty well, but it was probably because like things were apolitical, and I didn't try to rock that boat, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. Like I really cannot tell you whether I would rather struggle through the democracy that is crashing and burning in America right now, or just go back and continue with the pseudo-communist state of China. A lot of me, there's actually plans that like if the next few months go awry, I think my wife and I will probably go back to China.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had a plan to go back, or if it was something that especially with Kaylee, if she was wanting to go back, or how that was. Now, did you guys have? This is a personal question for me, because all of my media, all of my entertainment is streaming. You was able to watch Arrow, and was your Facebook restricted, or did you feel restricted in your social media?
If I did not have a software for my computer and phone, I would not have been able to access any of that. So it's just a pretty normal thing for foreigners to have a virtual private network. It's called a VPN.
Yes.
And you watch Netflix from any country you want. You can access your social media accounts and that sort of thing. But I did in some way, like I was there during the debates and primaries for the presidential election. And I remember flying back from Thailand, trying to catch up on news about America and feeling like I was flying into a dumpster fire because it was right after Trump had been acquitted of impeachment and the impeachment charges. So like, I do feel like I was somewhat bubbled because I was getting some news, but really I didn't like filter through all of the news, right? So it was just really what popped up and what I was interested in and looked at. So yeah, I do feel like it was somewhat restricted just because I didn't have regular contact with people that kind of knew what was going on in America.
What a time to come back too.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Because I was one of you guys was planning on going back. I know one of the things that I love is your heart of activism. The whole time I've known you, you've been involved in activism. I know I told the students about how you had. Sorry, I got motorcycles going by. I'm outside just because I'm outside all I can. So I love to be outside, or especially right now. So I'm recording this outside. But I told the students about the pizza restaurant that you had done at one time as an outreach. And I thought that was an amazing thing as a nonprofit to do. And I know you're involved in some politics now. Would you have any advice? A lot of our students, our student body of our club is mainly LGBTQ. Well, we are an LGBTQ, fully affirming and welcoming club. So everyone in our club is either part of the community or allies of the community. And we're active in social justice. Several people are involved on campus politics, involved in the Democratic Party locally, and are interested in activism. And in a few weeks, I think in November, we're actually going to have Dr. Robin Espinosa come also and talk virtually. Would you have any recommendations for someone how to get involved in activism, or how even to identify activism, or areas that they need to get involved in?
Yeah, so I've thought about that a lot today. You know, like this talk has really forced me to maybe define activism in a different way, because I think activism for me has morphed throughout the last 10 years. Even more than that. I've been active maybe longer than that, but really the last 10 years is really when I've grown into engagement with issues that I wanted to change. But to get involved is difficult depending on where that person enters, you know, like so activism for me isn't just, so this is maybe what I wanted to get at, like the heart of what I've been thinking about is like, I've been asking questions in preparation for this talk to other people. And it's like, what do you think about when you think about an activist? And like, I had some people draw me pictures. I had some people write me descriptions. I had some people like answer that question and just talk through it. And really the people came back to me with an image of a protester, of a demonstrator that was like marching in the streets with signs, that showed up to rallies, that were standing in front of government buildings with megaphones, demanding change. And I think those are perfectly valid avenues for activism, but often those are short term. We have seen Black Lives Matter do this, where we have a movement, and the movement's been growing. There's been momentum, but you kind of have these ebbs and flows of like public action and demonstration. And 2020 seems to be when everything has exploded. And so for the Black Lives Matter movement, that's been the case. Like what's been building for years now has kind of come to settle as a more permanent movement for demanding change. But I think after, let's hope that police reform happens. Let's hope that some of Black Lives Matter's platform issues are kind of addressed, and that Black bodies and Black lives start to matter more in an institutional way. Well, what happens after that? That's always the question, is like, what are we doing after that, right? And so, I mean, for me, activism looks a lot different, I think, than most people. I show up to Black Lives Matter protest. I show up with signs. I show up and like protect people with my body. I show up as an ally. I show up, in whatever way I need to show up. So that I think that's a valid way to go about it. But my activism also looks like I write policies for candidates. So I've written with a friend, Crystal Cook Marshall, and I wrote a plan for agricultural economic development in West Virginia for a gubernatorial candidate. And that plan was pretty much adopted in its entirety and is on Stephen Smith's website now. So like that is one way that I engage activism, is writing policy for things that I think is important. I'm a campaign manager for a local candidate who I think really has a good vision for what politics should be. So I said, I want to partner with you. I want to come alongside you. I want to support you in your work. And here's my skills. How can I help you? That's two temporary things, but also what I do in my work at the Crisis Center in Bristol, Virginia, is a longer term thing. And so right now I work with the Suicide Lifeline. I also work with victims or survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And I'm trying to work with some folks in the community and the organization to build a program for people recovering from substance use disorder, to try to teach them job skills and life skills so that they can re-enter the workforce, be a productive part of the community. Really, that's going to help economic development, community development. I mean, we have a large portion of our population absent from civil life, from the workforce, because there's so much despair around the recent years of degradation of our economy, of our community, of our commons, of our spiritual life. We can say all those things have kind of led to this addiction crisis, and maybe overdose crisis is a better word in Appalachia. But I was thinking about that today, and it's like people have been pushing against capitalism, which is what I would say is behind most of the problems with addictions and overdose, for years. And people were self-medicating for years with alcohol, with like lower end drugs. But now that it's become an overdose crisis, and we've had thousands of people absent from workforce, people now want to pay attention to it. When people are dying and when people can't go to work and our economy is failing, then the government wants to pay attention to it. Not when it was a problem, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, when coal mining started, then nobody cared because they were just making profit. Now they care because it's now causing the region economic issues. So there's been people like pushing that issue all along too. So it's like, I don't know. I think what I'm trying to say, I mean, I do consulting for nonprofits and organizations for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do strategic planning consulting. I consider all those parts of my activism because I'm helping organizations better serve their community. I'm embedding ideology about inclusion into the change makers and the institutions in those communities. And so I think that my activism is more like a lifelong journey. And my definition, if anybody wants to get it, of activism at this point is like a lifelong engagement with political, social, cultural, or economic systems with the intent of equity among those affected by those systems. And I would say that's all living beings. That's a really lofty thing. I still eat meat and definitely contribute to speciesism. But I think that there is space for us to work toward a more equitable world for all the living beings inside of it. And so I think that entering activism looks like changing who you are. I think it looks like being educated about what inequities exist in the world and what systems create those inequities. It's about surrounding yourself with people who are educated but also compassionate and pragmatic. So that's probably a big difference between me and people who sit as left of center politically as I do. I'm extremely left of center in my ideologies. I'm not as left of center in my actions. I would say that I'm less militant than most friends that I have. And some of that, I think, comes from understanding that as a non-binary human, I have to be pragmatic about how I present my body, how I present my life, how I put myself on the line, and that one step in the right direction right now is better than 5 steps in the wrong direction if we mess up. And so I think that's what's on the line with our election right now. I think that's what's happening is a lot of young people are saying, um, let's vote really left so that we can show the Democratic Party that Joe Biden is not who we want. No, Joe Biden is not who we want. I would say he's a terrible candidate in my mind. But Joe Biden is a whole lot better than Trump. Trump is endangering my life actively. He is creating a situation where people with federal monies can't have sensitivity training. They can't have training to be more sensitive to the issues of minorities. He is writing, anti-Muslim bills for other people. He's endangering other people's lives. And so at this point, I'm like, yes, Joe Biden sucks. There's no question about that, right? But where will my body be? Where will my life be? Will my marriage stand to my wife if Trump gets back in office? Will that be dissolved? Will my ability to function as a human being on the level that everyone else does that has privileges above mine be endangered if you don't vote for Joe Biden? Probably. I think that's a realistic possibility. So I think activism looks like also understanding what battles to fight and when to say, this is not where I want to go, but it's one step in the right direction, and the alternative would be 5 steps backwards. And so activism, developing yourself, your outlooks, your education, your friend groups, the people that you work with, the places that you embed yourself in, and where you live life. I think those are all parts of how we engage activism. Personally, I think that probably the easiest way to get involved with activism right now is to go join up with a Black Lives Matter group in your area and see what they're doing. That's one of the most pressing issues that we're facing as a country, and Black and brown bodies specifically are facing severe difficulties right now with impending authoritarian changes to our government. And so that would be one way, but we can't let activism stop the moment that we walk away from a protest. We can't let that change. And so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it does.
I think that was awesome. I put myself on mute just so I could cheer you on. That was amazing, Atlas. It honestly was, agree on over 100% with everything you said. And just is amazing. And I do agree with this election and I really think that, and I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but that a lot of people don't mind if you go to a Black Lives Matter rally. They don't mind if you want to participate and think you've done your part and walk away. Mm-hmm. They're terrified of this generation doing what you're talking about, changing your life around what matters. And that's kind of my fear is if it's in vogue to go to a Black Lives Matter rally and then walk away and thought, well, I've done my part for 2020. What really upset me something really upset me this week. My son is biracial, and he was really just tore up over what happened with Breonna Taylor, and made me so mad. And I was so mad I had to apologize. I'm gonna tear up talking about it. I was so mad I had to apologize the next day, because what happened with him is what I'm afraid happened to so many. it was so political in that all they want to do is show minorities. What he said was, he's like, he's not old enough to vote yet. He'll vote the next election, but he's like, I really feel like my vote wouldn't even matter. And in my mind, that's the whole thing that was behind that, is to show minorities, look, your vote's not going to matter, so why vote? When right now, Gen Z is the largest group that's ever has the opportunity to vote ever. And I keep posting about that and sharing about that with the students and sharing about anybody that'll listen. You can change the nation right now, and they know it, and they're terrified about that. And I also do agree that Joe Biden is maybe not the choice, but a choice in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, a better choice nonetheless. And don't take me, a lot of people push back to that as like voter shaming, and like, I'm not going to shame you for your vote. I think it's important to go vote no matter what. I'm just saying that, like, from my point of view, this seems really dangerous to sit out of this election. It seems like a really dangerous spot for minorities.
No. I agree. And also, I know I have some people that I share influence with, people that I engage with, who are pushing third-party candidates, and I really think this is not the election to do that. And that's my personal preference. And I think it's way too dangerous.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's kind of what a lot of my friends are pushing, and I'm like, because they think because we're in a red state, they think Trump's just automatically got Tennessee, so we can like show the Democratic Party something by voting third party. And maybe that's true, but what if Gen Z does show up? What if millennials do show up? Right? Like, what if we actually get people to the polls to vote, and we change that? And like, I find it somewhat defeatist to just say, well, we're going to give up and like, vote for something else, versus working to get people engaged and at the polls. And that's a huge burden for activists, for people engaged politically to carry, because the disengagement and the disenfranchisement and the disillusionment with our political system comes from way above them, and it's intentional. So like, I think that that's a really hard burden to carry, to say, well, just get people out to vote. That's not really the message I'm trying to say. But like, what if that happens? That's my question, is like, what if we can actually get Gen Z and millennials out? Then can we change Tennessee being red? I think we could. Do I think that's realistic? I think I'm less optimistic about that. But I think we could do that if Gen Z and millennials got out at the numbers that we could. But yeah, I think this election will, for a long time, I think a last election was a defining moment in America's history. I think acquitting Trump was a defining moment in America's history. I think that recent events in 2020 and some of the laws that's went into place have been defining events. And I think this election is going to be another one of them. I think that if Trump wins, it's not about Trump, right? It's not about him. And I don't ever mean to speak it that way. It's about what he represents. It's about the degradation of evangelical Christianity, one. And I mean, full transparency, I don't claim any religion anymore. I haven't been to church in a very long time, but love theology, would still sit down and talk to somebody deeply about theology, and very well educated about theology. And I just find it abysmally disappointing that we see a large faction of the people who proclaim to be Christians supporting such an immoral leader. And so I think, that's one thing that's on the line. I mean, bodily bodily safety, but also like just the safety to live your life for minorities is on the line. I think economic security is on the line. For the 99% below the first percent that has, the same amount of wealth that the rest of us do. I think economic security is on the line for the working class. And I know one of the questions that you asked me before was like, what populations do I really work with? Like, who do I target with activism? And in general, I would say Central Appalachia is the place where my activism has taken, I've engaged the most there. I would say that the populations really depend on who's being disenfranchised at the time. I think the working class, like I just said, I think we stand to lose a huge battle here if this election goes awry. I think that Appalachia in general stands to lose in a lot of ways if we continue to forget and forsake our roots. I grew up as a small kid in Appalachia, and I remember my town being full of like hardworking union people that like idealized this history that may have not been the exact idealization that they had of it, but they had this vision of Appalachia that is extremely different than the one that people have now. And when people claim to be a redneck, I cuss a little bit too much because, I'm a redneck, and that means something way different than what the beer drinking, truck driving boys with their hats on mean. That means that I believe in people's labor being freely given and fairly compensated. It means that I believe in a rural place where people have the same opportunities that they do anywhere else. It means I believe in a community that works together as a community. It means a lot of different things than the more commercialized image of what redneck means now. And so it's really disheartening because I think at any given time, there's a lot of groups that really need somebody to engage, the systemic injustices around us on their behalf or alongside them sometimes. I think often alongside them is the better move. Sometimes I think we engage for people, but I think that it really just depends on who is needing to engage in justice and move toward equity at the time to where my efforts go. But generally, I would say I work with working class people in rural areas and queer people in rural areas. And right now I'm working with survivors of violence and assault, and mainly that is a skewed gender demographic. So a lot of women are attacked, but we are specifically working on a grant at the center that supports male victims of sexual assault because it happens often, and males feel like they're it's too unmanly to talk about, that they were taken advantage of by this sissy girl, and it's going to make them look like a wimp. No, that's not the case. That's some stigma that we need to throw out the window and leave behind. But it happens. And so, Appalachia is I've tried to leave Appalachia several times and I end up back here. And, sometimes I guess the word from Appalachia would be, I get a hankering to leave. And, I'll leave for a while, and then my heart hurts and I want to come back home to the mountains. And so I'm trying to figure out how to live a life as me here, because sometimes that is really difficult. And so I think a lot of my activism, a lot of my engagement actually comes from trying to make this a place that I want to be. And, I think maybe as activists, we want to have, or anybody that fights for justice, no matter what you label yourself, maybe we want to claim this bigger intention, like we're the heroes or something. I'm no hero. I just want a good place for me and my wife to live. I want a good place to be loved. I want a community that's going to support me, where I can plug in and give them my strengths and support others in developing theirs too. And I'm an ally to a lot of populations, but at the end of the day, when my liberty is tied to yours and yours is tied to other people's, and if we work together we can get there. But I don't think we have to claim these audacious intentions. I think we just claim that we want the world to be better for us too.
That is amazing. And you may think you haven't been to church in a while, but you've been preaching for a while now. That was awesome. Very rare to put people on mute just so I can amen and cheer in the background. And for people that don't understand, and I think you'll agree with this, you can say Appalachia, but if you're not from there or you haven't, well, you know it too, you can live 20 years in Appalachia and not be an Appalachian. You know, if you're not from Appalachia, no one can fully understand what you just said. No one can fully understand what it's like to dig your heels in and talk to a group of people who are voting against the very issues that could help them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to vote against it because that's what the mailers said, that's what the news said, that's what the grandma said. Either the grandma doesn't understand politically what's going on. And I'm speaking this from personal experience. You know, I was a missionary to the Appalachian people for over 10 years and just would butt my head up politically against just so many programs that would help people, would help them. And they were against it because of the color of the president at the time, or because of this, or because of that, or just because that's the way it always has been. And for you to say, define what redneck means, absolutely 100% agree with that too. That was powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I do think Appalachians do that thing where like we vote against our interest. Not me specifically, but I think in the last 20 years or so, we have voted against our interest more often than not. And I find it interesting because so my master's degree is in Appalachian Studies. And I find it really interesting because one of the things that we get caught in is this idea that Appalachia is exceptional. But I'd bet if you were dropped as a missionary in a rural region of the West, you'd face some of the same problems because it's really the systems. So this is another question that I think that you ask is like, the systems that create Appalachia are not exceptional. The systems of capitalistic exploitation are not exceptional. They are ubiquitous in America, everywhere, And so the same systems that gave rise to the poverty in Appalachia gave rise to the poverty on Navajo Nation. The same system. Now, there's definitely a racial component there, so don't hear me say that there's not, but that exploitation of body and of labor, of those who have less power in rural regions, who have less access, less connections, less fill in the blank there, that is ubiquitous. And the rural regions throughout America mirror some of those across the world, especially in the global South. And so, this is, I took a course that I really got maybe too interested in. I'll get on to something and then spend too much time down that rabbit hole. But ecofeminism is a discipline that really looks at how oppression, how injustice, how domination is tied to our roots in colonialism. And in a world that is, even now, the Eastern world is being influenced so heavily by Western ideals that I think it's even, it's changing some of how Eastern countries work also. But in a world that is dominated by the idea that domination is the way that you take power, that you have progress, that is dominated with this idea of nature as subservient, as women as subservient, as those different genders are subservient. Like, I can't say that Appalachia is exceptional in any of that. I think that we have to start looking at what created this all. And, there was an argument that somebody made the other day, we're talking about the election. They said, my argument is that basically at the root of my argument is that voting for Joe Biden is harm reduction. And their argument is that within a colonial system, there's no harm reduction that can be done. Everything we do in the system is still harming someone, and that is true. If I had an election choice between Joe Biden and Mitt Romney, I probably wouldn't be making that argument that voting for Joe Biden's harm reduction, because I recognize that no matter how our system plays out, it's set up to hurt some people and to help others. no matter what we do to the system that we're working in, which is where anarchy comes in. And I have a whole spiel about anarchy, but people want to burn down the world and then rebuild it. And okay, that's fine with some things, but you can't burn down the whole government. What are we going to do in the meantime? And you can't just go out to the streets and create chaos, because that doesn't always get what we want either. There's, a methodical and tempered trajectory, I think, toward getting to our goals. But that's maybe what I've seen in some people that locally, at least, is that like people will hit the streets and they just want to create chaos and they think that's going to do something. And sometimes going to get arrested for unjust laws, that's definitely needed. I mean, that's how we tell democracy that like we want it to change, because it's supposed to be a government by the people. I don't think we live in a democracy anymore, but that's how it's supposed to work. But I think just going to create chaos doesn't always get us there. So that's a lesson that maybe I learned in my mid-20s, that like I need to slow down, and that these problems are imminent, but they've been imminent, and that it's not on me to solve all these problems in the next 6 months or the next year. It's on me to partner with other people who's been doing this work way longer than I have, learn from them, and when they're ready and when I'm ready, they can pass the baton on and I can continue that movement. But going out and just like blindly trying to escalate until we get somewhere different, that doesn't mean that the different place is going to be any better. It just means it's different. So like that was a really powerful lesson for me to learn. And you could probably see that from knowing me now versus knowing me before.
Well, I'm the same one. Like I said, you're one of the few people that know the Roger of a decade ago. And I'm a whole different person now. So much happier, so much healthier, so much more whole. And it's so beautiful to see you, Atlas. I could say you seem so much more in yourself, and so much more, even with everything you're talking about, just an attitude of joy that it's beautiful to see in you. I mean that.
Well, thank you. I was having dinner with a friend last night, and I realized that the last 10 years of my life, which is like when I guess I met you about 8 years ago, but last 10 years of my life has been really hard. There's been moments where I didn't want to live anymore. There's been moments where I didn't know what to do anymore. There's been moments where like I thought that I had no future to be had. And so like the last 10 years have had a lot of stressful things, a lot of good things too. I lived a lot of that time coming into who I am, and really finding a chosen family that has shown me how to love and how to be loved. And so there's been a lot of good in that 10 years. But, I've looked back now, and I'll say this probably in 10 more years. I don't know exactly what I'll say, but I would not forsake the growth that I have done over the last 10 years to get rid of any of the troubles. And psychologically, we think that sometimes it's easy to say that because it makes meaning of all the struggle that you went through. But this conversation was particularly in the context of being non-binary, which falls under the trans umbrella. Like sometimes I'm on a scale, like I'm pretty fluid, and maybe one of the most fluid people as far as gender that I've met until recently. I was talking to this person. They're 55 and just recently transitioned, and they own the parts of themselves of any socialized gender. They own who they are. And like it was one of the first times that I saw another human being do that. And so this conversation really brought out that the work I've had to do as a queer human functioning in a world that is really hostile toward queer humans, and particularly queer humans who don't fit the gender norm. That work has made me a human that I am proud of. It's made me a human that I love. And I don't know that if I wouldn't have engaged that journey over the last 10 years, that I would be able to say that. I don't think that I would. And quite frankly, that reality that I'm not living, that seems a lot scarier than any of the danger that I face as living who I am. And I can't say that for everybody, for anybody listening to that. Like, you make your own decisions. You stay in the closet if you need to. You like you mask however you need to. You come out when you need to. You show up when you need to. The decisions are yours, and nobody should be able to shame anybody for the decisions we make about who we are or how we present that to other people. But honestly, I think the reality where I'm not this human is a lot scarier than the reality that I face as this human.
And thank you for sharing. That's going to resonate with a lot of people that I have the honor of having influence with. So thank you. And my heart breaks. Where we're at Red Door, we're a safe space. A majority of the people who are part of the LGBTQ community have come out at Red Door. A lot of times, especially ones that are college students, their families don't know. I mean, I also have opportunity to have some influence and discussion with some adults who are transitioning or have come out, and it's cost them marriages and lives and different things. And it's helped me realize some needs in the community. Like, and I'm not sure about in Bristol, but I know here there's nowhere for like if you're trans and homeless, or trans and mental health issues, or trans and certain domestic issues, there's nowhere here really for you to go to. You can't go to the women's shelters. You can't. Most people have to go out of state to find assistance, and that's one thing my wife and I personally, during our time here, would love to see happen. Be some kind of place that we welcome to everyone. That's welcoming to everyone, and that's kind of a personal thing that would like to see happen. I won't say we're working on it because we're not working on it right now, but we're always trying to build relationship, trying to find community of people to help make that happen. I've got a couple of people in mind. I'm saying this, that who are in the trans community and have experienced homelessness and have nowhere to go, and it's terrible. But that the shelters won't take you, or that they're subject to domestic abuse, and they can't go, the places. It's heartbreaking. And there are, I shouldn't say that. I also know one place that does take people in the trans community, and I was so awesome and honored to find this one place that does take people who've been in domestic abuse. But just, I mean, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for addressing that. And honestly, like I said, if you want to come back on again, I would love to talk more, because the more you talk, the more things you say, the more things I think of. And have you found too, when you start with me, of course, I mean, and I'll be honest, in my cisgender privileged world of a middle-aged white man, I have discussions of colonialism, and people act like they can't see it. It just totally. I really try to be balanced. I really try to be fair in my discussions. I try to leverage my privilege that I do recognize that I have. But some of the discussions I have with people, I just can't believe that they can't see some of the problems wrong in our world right now, because they're not victims of the problems of this world, or they don't have children or family members' problems of this world. And one of the things I want to ask you too is, I know a lot of the people that are students and people that I have influence with that are interested in activism, and you spoke this a second ago, it's easy sometimes to see what's wrong, and it's easy sometimes to work towards meeting symptoms. And I think you saw this in the work I've done before. We were really good at feeding symptoms. Like if there was needs of food or this or that, we can provide that, but we're not going against the systemic causes. Which, like right now, the work I'm involved in, we still do meeting the needs. I believe we need to meet needs, but we're more interested in fighting systemic causes. And do you have any ideas to help people identify the systemic cause to something? I know that's a large question to ask, but I just didn't know if you found something that works.
Yeah. So I keep education. The word education keeps popping in my mind. I was a teacher for a few years, so that makes sense. But maybe I should be more specific there, because, as a kid in Appalachia that grew up really poor, I was always told that you go to college and that's how you make a good life for yourself. And for me, that has worked out okay, though. I mean, I I struggle like other people. I mean, we were unemployed for a while. I've had times where I haven't had groceries as an adult. I've had times where I haven't had money to pay my bills. I'm not saying that like I've had the perfect adult life, but it has worked out that my life is better than my parents, and that's a large result of college. But I will say that I have a lot of debt because of that, and that the way that the America's economy now works, you go to college and get a degree, it doesn't mean you're going to get a good job. It doesn't mean you're going to get out of poverty. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to live the life you live. And I think that's a message that kids need to hear and don't hear often enough. But when I say education, I mean reading people like bell hooks, reading people who are engaging in the intersectionalities of our systemic injustices, reading people talking about colonialism. And if you don't want to read it, there's enough videos now, but I would highly suggest that, you know, people read that. But it's difficult because it, we miss the systematic issues because we're taught to be blind to them. We are not taught about systems in general in a history class, a social studies class, a science class. Like, systematic thinking is not something that we're given as a tool. And I, like, not to be conspiratorial here either, but I mean, it's lacking so much so that, like, what can we conclude other than the ruling class doesn't want us to have it, right? So, like, maybe that's the greatest point of resistance that you can actually have, is to be educated about and make your own opinions about what's happening. So Howard Zinn has a book out. Young people can read the Young People's History of the United States. Zinn also has a History of the United States book out. But, you know, and there's also some critique of Zinn. There's somebody that wrote a book that pretty much said that he made everybody hate America through the history that he wrote. I don't find as much validity in that critique as I do in Zinn's work, but nonetheless, I mean, I think studying our history, I find it so compelling to believe that systematically we have set up America to disadvantage Black people, brown people, indigenous people, queer people, poor people, people in rural areas, people, however we want to say that, people, immigrants from other countries. I find it so compelling to think that we have an intentional system that does that, that I now just can't, I can't see how anybody wouldn't see it the same way I did. And so because of that, I try very hard to give people grace when I talk to them, right? Like, there's a space in me, and maybe I was talking to somebody about this the other day, you know, they were like, I just want to, like, force people into doing it the way that I see it. You know, they were like a young kid at a college, and they were like just entering their field, and they're like, well, if people don't do it, then what consequences can be put in place to make them do it? You know, and maybe we've been doing that kind of setup for too long. Consequences don't always work. I mean, there's laws, and white men are still out killing Black people, and they ain't getting shit done to them. So, like, it doesn't matter what consequences we put into place. It matters if we can hold a space for enough grace in ourselves to engage the people who are misled. Now, there are those people that I think no matter what you do, they are not gonna come to see it anywhere near what I think is justly. But there are those people who I think are misled, and those people, whether we disagree at the end or not, if they can see that there's another option for how to view the world, I think that in and of itself is a valuable feat, right? Like, if my time has given them another paradigm that they can, you know, morph into however they're seeing the world, then that's useful in and of itself. And so I don't know, like, education is definitely it, because education gives you all these different paradigms. It gives you a different way of looking at the world. It gives you multiple ways of looking at the world. And I mean, that can happen with just talking. I've found after, you know, moving to Tennessee, to Johnson City especially, I did some work for my degree that was with trans women. So I researched about like how trans women's identities change in certain spaces. And I heard stories from elders in the trans community, and I'll be really honest, we don't have elders because they die. Yeah, so that was extremely valuable to me, because these were people that had either made it against the odds or had stayed quiet about their transition, or who kind of just flew under the radar intentionally. And so they had different ways of surviving, but it was really valuable to me to sit down and talk to activists, talk to people who had taken activism as part of their life because it was part of their survival. Um, it was important for me to sit down and learn from those people. And so I would say that that's one way that you can identify systems, is go find the most vulnerable person that you know. Don't tokenize them, but listen to their experience in life. And then, this is the important part, you go vote for that person. You have that most vulnerable person in mind, and then you live as though that person is in danger, and you vote for that person, you live for that person, you make decisions to keep that person safe. And if we lived like that, then the world would be a better place. But that would be, that's one thing, is like just building relationships with people who experience life differently than you do. It is really invaluable, and has been valuable to me, especially in my later 20s, after about 25 or so. It's really changed the way that I interact with people, because I don't go to a relationship or a conversation showing up like I really don't put a lot of expectations on relationships anymore, right? Like I show up, and I want to learn about other people. I want to experience life alongside them, and whatever shape that takes, then I do that. But I don't know, like I've come to really value the times where I get to live alongside somebody that's had a different experience than I do.
No, I agree. And I want you to know, I'm going to go back later when I record this, and before I share it, and probably just tweet the hell out of you, because this has been awesome. with you're preaching again, and you're channeling my wife too, when you talk about, and I love how you said, and have that person in mind when you vote. She says that all the time, and I love that. And I was going to ask you, this, you already headed where I was wanting to lead the discussion, is because I ask you, like who would you say, because I know you've always been a reader. You've always been an avid reader. And I was going to ask you about who are you reading now, or who would you suggest reading? Bell Hooks read her book in 2020. My job that I work at night allows me a lot of time to listen to audiobooks and read. So I do a lot of that. But I didn't know about Zen, so I'm going to take that one. Anything else you want to recommend, please let me know. And also, I'm going to, if you're okay with it, when this is over and I post it, I might put some of your social media links so people can connect with you, if that's okay. Because there's actually a lady I'm thinking of right now who leads a group in Radford trying to make some changes in our community that I think would love to connect with you. Just some stuff that you said. This been ridiculously invaluable. It's been crazy. Now, on a little different slant, are you still interested in theology, or do you read any progressive theology? Because that's been my love that I've discovered. I love progressive theology. I've loved getting out of the grips of evangelical theology, and now I even have like influence of Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism into my theology, which I love, and I think it fits perfectly with Christ consciousness. Also, don't use the term Christian. Even when I think I was Christ follower when we first met, now I call myself a Christ-leaning progressive. Is what I call myself, just because the stigmas that come with all of that when you build relationships. And for me personally, relationships now are deeper. Not being evangelical, when I meet someone, I can love them as a person and not listen to them planning my retort on how to save them, or share anything with them. I just love it. I love meeting people where they're at. I love loving people where they're at. And most of my partners, I'm going to say most of my partners, but several of my partners in the work that we do are not faith-based, but they're not faith-based, but they're some of the most spiritual people I've ever met in my life. You know, they may not claim me spirituality, but some of the most spiritual people I've ever met in my life. If you look at the fruits of the Spirit, or any way you would define spirit, you know, they're some of the most spiritual people I've ever met.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. I was thinking about that recently. You know, a lot of the people who claim atheist as their identity probably bear more fruits of the Spirit than people who I know who claim Christian as their identity. And you know, that's unfortunate because so to answer your question about theology, I first want to say that like my understanding of theology, especially in the Christian tradition and some Judaism too, but especially in the Christian tradition, is one of the reasons why I hold the values that I hold. Like if we look at theology in context of where it came from, I think a lot of the values that lead us to fight for justice are there. And so I claim that part of who I am, and I claim the part that learned from, you know, the ministry that I did, the theology that I engaged. I claim all of those parts, but I also claim the hurt and the trauma that have come along with them. And for me, I've decided that I can be a human who claims the past influence of theological concepts while also protecting myself from the hurt that comes along with engaging in religion, which I sometimes find unfortunate because truthfully, churches are one of the best places for community to happen. And churches are really good at building community, and I wish all the time, I think about this question a lot, is like, how do I build a place that's not religious for people to come and build community like they do at churches? And if we could do that, I think that a lot of people would have meaningful community in a way that they don't right now. But it's hard, and I think I find it super unfortunate that I don't have a community like I did when I went to churches. But you know, like also I didn't have my whole self when I showed up to church either, and so that was difficult for me. Very painful for a long time. So as far as theology, I've now, you know, I lived in Henan, China. I lived in the city of Zhengzhou, which actually is the birthplace of Taoism. And it is kind of the cradle of Chinese culture. It's along the Yellow River, so there's a lot of cool history there. I got to learn some about Taoism while I was there. I've read Buddhism. Jainism, which is like a minority religion outside of Hinduism. I've studied Hinduism. I've studied most major religions, some, you know, minor religions. And at the end of the day, I've come to see a lot of concepts as very similar among those theologies. And so, yeah, I am still interested in theology. I would say, like, being honest here, most of the time, I think the way that theology comes out in my life is I have some Christian lecturing me about my homosexual, sinful lifestyle, and then I school them about the Bible, and they are not happy. And so that's been useful to me at the very least. But I don't want that to be how I have to use theology. I wish that I could sit down and talk to people left of center about what theology could bring to our lives, because at the end of the day, theology is the study of God, but I see it as more the study of our relationship to a higher power, but also to each other and to the environment and to there's, you know, those systematic relationships of our relation to ourselves, to God, to others, and to the environment. And even though that's systematic theology, I think that's embedded throughout most theology that I found. So I do like to learn from theology. I still do read some. The 400-Year History of God is a really good book. It's written by an ex-nun. can't remember her name right now. My roommates, when I read that book, they said I got real pretentious though. There's a lot of history there, and so I just wanted to talk about it all the time. And they said you got to kind of tone that back down. So I have to be careful, maybe how I present that to other people. But yeah, I think that theology has a lot of value. I just think it's often misused by a lot of people, and which turns a lot of people off from learning about God or others, or and even if you don't believe in God, like I sit on a line where I'm pretty agnostic at this point. Like I think that there is a connectivity among living beings, and if that's a higher power, then that's what we'll call it. But I don't really have to have those answers, and so that's kind of where I've landed as an agnostic. But I think there's a lot of value, especially, I mean, if we look at the Old Testament particularly as an allegorical work, the way that it was written in the Jewish tradition. If we
Isn't
look
it something totally foreign to so many people that yet you engage and encounter with?
Yeah. And if we did that, if we looked at it like an allegory, I think there's a lot of wisdom that was passed down, which was the point, right? It was the point. The point was to pass wisdom down. And I think we are missing so much because we live in this binary black and white space, and we don't want to take things as anything but literal. And I think we're missing so much history and tradition and just like wisdom that have come out of thousands of years of living life alongside of one another, and we're forsaking it for our version of reality. And I think it's a really disappointing state to be in.
I can't agree more, Atlas. For my turning point in theology was realizing a couple things that led to just what you're talking about. One is that the Bible was written by minority people, largely for minority people in oppressed situations. And so, we look at it through the lens largely of colonialism and imperialism. And when you get that out of the way, so much of it makes sense. And you don't have to reconcile contradictions. You don't have to reconcile or piece together a verse here, a verse there, a verse there, and say, well, this is what it says, because it was never meant to say that to begin with. Then secondly, realizing about the Jewish influence, that Jesus was Jewish. All of the first leaders, readers, and authors were Jewish, and that you look at things from a Jewish perspective in the Old Testament, like I said, the myth, the allegory, the poetry, the history. You look at it as what it is, and it's. I mean, I've been told it's heretical, in certain, but now my involvement with the Episcopal Church, Presbyterian Church, the Lutheran Church, they see things that way, but in the methods and systems of evangelicalism that you and I were a part of, this was, you didn't talk that way, you didn't see that way, and it is. I really do think it is intentionally. We keep saying not being conspiratorial, but like sometimes you got to wonder what else is it when you're only allowed to look down one hallway. It kind of does lead you a certain direction.
Yeah, and so I'm a member of my local Episcopalian parish, and really respect Episcopalian and Methodist churches that I've been to, both. And I've been engaged with some Lutheran churches over the years online, and so really respect the deep engagement they do with theology and scripture and what that means for their life. I think what made me want to join the Episcopal Church that I joined years ago in Fredericksburg, Virginia, when I lived there, was that when I asked the priest about his views about heaven and hell, he espoused a universalist view that basically said, I think God loves everyone, and I don't think a loving God sends people to hell for judgments that humans make. And I was like, oh damn, this is like, I don't even know what to say to you. Like, I went home and told my family that I was Episcopalian, and they literally thought it was like Buddhism or something. They thought that I had like switched, like continental origins and everything, so it was a really odd process. But you were talking about reading the Old Testament, and I was just thinking, I'm often really surprised when Americans, especially white, middle class, wealthy Americans, can find themselves in the stories of Moses and his people, but cannot freaking find themselves in Xerxes or the emperors or the oppressors. And that kind of view, like, to tell me that America is the oppressed one, to tell me that white people are the oppressed one, like, there's sometimes that I just can't even engage at that point, right? It's like, if you're going to claim this history and this tradition as your own, then you're a joke to tell me something. And you use the word heretical, and that's what I would call it too. It's like, you have to be joking to tell me that you are Moses, but you are not the emperor. Like, that blows my mind. And then for people to tell me, like, people tell me all the time that my views and boundaries around myself and how they should treat me as oppressive to their freedoms. Bullshit. Like, you have lived for a long time with the freedoms to do whatever you want, regardless of what other people suffer as a cause. And we are at a point where we've recognized that, and we have to start reconciling it. We have to start reconciling that your freedom ends where it starts to impede on my freedom or my safety. And we have to address that as a society. But, that's a change within ourselves too. When I go out and we'll go back to COVID, I wear a mask. But when I go outside, if I don't feel like wearing a mask, okay, that's fine. But the 80-year-old person that I may walk by if I'm carrying COVID doesn't feel like dying today either. Like, you don't get your comfort at the cost of someone else's life or freedom or safety. You don't get that. And I think it's been really interesting, because I went from a country where people were masked because they had colds. They wanted to keep other people safe. They were kind and considerate. I went to Thailand, and they were the kindest people that I've probably ever come in contact with. And I came back to a country where people are selfish. And what also blows my mind right now is that I've been told my whole life that I'm part of a generation that's selfish. I've been told my whole life that we're out for participation trophies and, awards and whatever. No, we've lived a hard life. And people my age are the people that walk in the restaurants with a mask on, or walk into Walmart with a mask on, because they know that their choices impact somebody else. It's like middle-aged people, the people above us that was projecting all their bullshit downward. Like, those are the people that I find to be selfish right now. They're whining about what's going on. And I don't mean to use those words as throwing around them as buzzwords. But really, I mean, I see a lot of middle-aged and older people whining about mandates. I see a lot of people whining about protest. I see a lot of people whining about other things. You don't live a life where you have to engage protest, and that's fine. But you need to see the value of the other people who do live that life. And when people can't do that, I think we have a severe disconnect in what I find to be innate, this empathy that we have inside ourselves. I think that's an innate characteristic of human beings, and we are socialized out of it. And I think, like, we have to address how we're going to teach people to be better human beings by teaching them to identify with somebody that's not them.
That's awesome. And that we're going to have to close out, but that is amazing, Atlas. And I can't think of a better way to end. And I'm going to do everything I can when I get this. It'll take me a couple days to get edited and out with the work, but I'm going to do everything I can to share it. I think everybody needs to hear this. This has been awesome. I want to thank you so much. Do you want to share a good way to find you on social media?
Yeah, so my Facebook is Atlas in Appalachia, and Appalachia is spelled with Latch, the latch in the middle, spelled like it sounds. I have a Twitter, but I have lost my login, and I think my Twitter account is connected to my Chinese phone number, which I no longer have. So I'll try to get into that. I don't actually remember what my name is. And then my Instagram name, which I guess needs to be changed, is Amelia, 2 underscores together, so it just looks like a long underscore Charles. And I engage mostly on Facebook. People are welcome to send me a message. I'd be happy to partner with people in the work that they're doing. If anything sounds similar, or you just want to talk and say, hey, I have some ideas, listen to me. I'm happy to do that for folks that are trying to engage in activism, or just a different lifestyle that's more caring toward other human beings. So whatever that looks like for them, I would be happy to do that. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and I hope that other people will be able to see this later on. But yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. I mean, I've always loved our relationship, and I love it more and more, and just honored to have you here with us right now. I'm going to end the recording, but I was going to talk to you off the recording for a couple minutes too, if you got time.
Yep.
Okay, let me end it right here. Thank you so much. And